Hi, my name is Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, Savage Reads, and Merry Christmas to all those celebrating. I am so excited. The next couple days, we get to do all the fun traditions. One of the really fun ones that we have here is Kagatillo. So we've got, here, I'll show you our little one. Ours is small. And we give him little treats all December, and then on Christmas Eve we hit him with a stick and ask him to poop out presents. So that will be very fun. I'm very excited for that, and it is a fun tradition from here in Catalonia. And for a quick embroidery update, gotten to this part, so I feel like I'm just about done. I just have the path, but I need to get to a craft store to find the other media that I want to use to fill this in. I'm thinking something kind of with like a soft glimmer or shine and maybe a little bit purpley but dark. I don't know, but I am going to go look at a craft store hopefully soon, but not right now. There is too much to celebrate. So that's kind of what's going on in my life. Christmassy things, baking, having fun, and having the girls home from school. But I did have some books that I read this last week, so I'd love to do a quick wrap up and just get excited. The best time of the year is coming up when everyone comes up with their best books of the year, and I will be waiting until probably January 1st and making videos of my very favorite fiction and nonfiction books from the year. And so look forward to that because I'm excited. Those are my favorite videos to watch, my favorite videos to make, and I'm really excited for that time of the year. It's another gift right there, all the great book recommendations, so I'm very excited. So let's talk about what I have read the past week or so. So I picked up the book I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and this, I guess, has a Netflix series, and it's following our main character who is going home to meet her boyfriend's parents, and at the same time, she has this internal monologue of, should I break up with him or should I not? So that's the general setup, but a bunch of things keep showing up that seem like pretty big red flags. And honestly, I was kind of driven nuts by the main character's inner monologue of, should I break up with him? Shouldn't I? I don't know. What should I do? When there were a lot more red flags that I felt like seemed alarming, right? And so that was a little annoying. And this book just, I don't know, not much happened. Luckily, it was pretty short, so you could get through it quickly, which is a great redeeming quality in this. I think the author was trying to be really clever, and it somehow worked sometimes, but a lot of the times felt like it was just over-explaining and philosophizing and just going on, and I had a hard time really caring. And so there were moments of like that, oh no, I'm scared, because this is supposed to be a bit of a thriller, and I thought, okay, yeah, this is gonna be something, and I just felt a little disappointed, and I didn't think that the resolution really worked well for me, and so I didn't love this one. The nice thing was I didn't waste too much time on it because it was short, but it was kind of meh. Now, I did finish reading out loud to my daughter the second book in the Old Kingdom trilogy. I read Lirael by Garth Nix, and this was such a fun read aloud. I have loved this series. We started with Sabriel, now we've finished Lirael, we are on to the next one, which is of Whoreson, and I think there are other books that are like prequels and after, but I think this is the main trilogy, and I had such a delightful time. I forgot how much I liked these books, and I'm so glad that they've held up well. Now, my only like little caveat to that is these are not really written for an 8-year-old. Reading them out loud was fine because she's loving them and she's having a great time. And when I got to certain things, I'm like, we're just gonna skip over that page a little bit. Some of it was too much for an 8-year-old. I definitely would recommend this to a 13-year-old. I think that that is more the age that this would work for, because none of it is super explicit or awful, just maybe not quite age appropriate for an 8-year-old. And so that is my only problem with it, is that the age that I'm reading it's my bad, but reading it out loud, it's fine. I can skip those parts. And I always think that when you are reading a book out loud to a kid, it has to be a book that you as the parent wants to read, or you're not gonna have a fun time. And kids get that. If kids are listening to you reading and you're like, and then they went to the park, and then, you aren't excited to know what happens next, they're not gonna care. But if you're really excited and then she went into the cave and this happened, they're gonna be really engaged with you, because, it's contagious when people are excited about things. So I'm having a great time. I'm excited for this last one. And I love kind of this fantasy trilogy. I loved it so much as a teenager, and being able to revisit it has been just a delight. Now, this next book was a recommendation from Caitlin at Bandy's Books, and I read The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. And this is taking place in the late 1700s, and we have a midwife who is very good at her job and delivers so many babies very successfully. She lives in a small town in the United States, newly formed United States. And when a man who has been accused of raping a woman ends up dead, she is the first on the scene as one of the medical professionals in town. And throughout the book, we get not only the practice of her midwifery, but we get this mystery figuring out who killed the man and how and why, and the legal system of the time. And it was really interesting. And it has these murder trials and rape trials in it, and it has a lot of these historical elements. And I think my big complaint while reading it was that I thought the main character, Martha, almost seemed too relatable. Like, I thought for the time period, she should have been more problematic, and instead everything she was thinking was like a modern reader could get on board with. And so I was not too sure about it. But then I get to the author's note at the end, and I didn't realize going into this that this is based on the accounts of a real midwife at this time period. And the author goes through and shares what parts are fictionalized. So the murder and the mystery were very fictionalized, but a lot of these events were actually real. And this was a real midwife who kept a very detailed logbook of her life. And so a lot of the things that I was a little unsure about, this kind of quashed some of that. I felt, oh, well, she read it from Martha herself in the logbook. Okay. And so it made me way more on board with it, and made me think that this book was way cooler. I already thought, oh yeah, this was pretty good, like 4 out of 5 stars. And then the author's note kind of changed it. I'm like, no, this was really great. Because yes, this is not a biography of Martha Ballard, but it is a historical fiction version of her life. It is a very fictionalized version, and used so many of those actual sources and tried to be very accurate. I loved that the author was saying, yes, the river did freeze over, but I pushed it 2 years later instead of at this time to line it up with this. And I'm like, cool. You did a lot of research. And I would not know a lot about midwifery back in the late 1700s. And so I thought that was fascinating. I highly recommend. It was really an interesting book. I am glad I picked it up. It's a little bit different. I feel like I don't read a ton of books set in this time period. It was really interesting to get that peek into that time period and how the justice system worked. It is very different than what happens today, and seeing how these cases would come before a judge and what happened in the courtroom was really fascinating. So yes, highly recommend if you want a good historical fiction book, but one that seems very well researched and rooted in fact. This one was great. Finally, I read the book Northwoods by Daniel Mason on the advice of Melinda at A Web of Stories. So make sure to check out her channel. She also recommended to read this book and not listen to it because there is a bit of some mixed media in the book. And I'm really grateful for that heads up, because I thought the book had some interesting things. There were some illustrations, letters, maps, diagrams, things of the sort mixed into this. And so it was a fun reading experience being able to see some of that. This book is following the history of a single house in the woods of New England. It starts out with a pair of young lovers who leave a Puritan colony to set up a little house out in these woods, and then we follow their story, what happens next, and each of these successive stories kind of ends in tragedy. These stories almost feel a little unconnected. They seem like a series of short stories, but they have that common thread of this house in the woods. It also carries through a lot of talk of apples and of catamounts or mountain lions, and that kind of pulls through the whole narrative, and it all comes together to tell this single story of this house in the North Woods, which is interesting. I am interested in books that don't pick a person as your main character, but you have kind of a place or an object as your main character, and I thought that that was a very interesting take. I think this is one of those kinds of books that you would read in an English class, because there were so many layers that you could dig into. What is the symbolism behind the apple? Some of the writing was really beautiful, and the different tones that each section took. Part of the novel was told through some letters, and switching those things up and seeing the different time periods and what was acceptable and what wasn't, and seeing how things changed over time. It all was really interesting. And I think in some ways you could really read this as a bit of a tragedy, but I think the main theme is that these things aren't really tragedies. It's all part of change in life as they move along. And I don't know, it had some interesting ideas. I enjoyed it, but it did feel maybe overwritten, but overwritten in a merited sort of way. Like, sometimes I read books that are so description heavy and I'm just like, ugh, just get to the point. And I feel like this had a purpose behind all the description and was written really well. So the writing was just gorgeous in this. I really think it was well done. And I think it is a book that needs to be talked about and dissected in like a classroom. I could see that working well for this because there are so many layers that you can delve into. There is a scene in the middle, and Melinda had mentioned this, and I had completely forgotten by the time I got to it and was shocked all again. It was a love scene with beetles, and ooh, no, it was too much for me. I was kind of disturbed by that whole section, kind of skimmed through that. I feel like the author was trying to show that beauty through tragedy and difficult times, but just don't write an erotic scene about beetles. It just, ugh. So that was my least favorite part of the book, but overall it was a really interesting one. That was only a couple pages, but overall it was a really interesting book and had so many different layers and so many things you could think about. And some of the stories I did find more compelling than others, but it was still worth it. So yeah, I recommend it. Tell me down below if you've read this book and what was your main takeaway. And I am glad I picked it up. It had a lot going on. And that is what I read this week. I will be back with another book wrap up before the end of the year, but I will also be back soon with my yearly wrap ups, which I am very excited to get to. So I will see you all soon. Let me know if you have any thoughts on these books in the comments down below, and I will see you all on the next one.